Jake had been stationed on the small outpost for what felt like forever. The base was located on the edge of human space, far from the busy parts of the galaxy. He often found himself alone, watching the stars through the small window of his quarters. It was peaceful but lonely, and he had grown used to the silence that stretched for days. The quiet was a welcome change from the constant hum of war back home. But it also meant that he rarely had visitors, at least, not any he could trust. That all changed one evening. Jake was sitting in the mess hall, staring at his half-empty dinner plate when the alarm went off. A loud, blaring sound that shook him from his daze. His heart raced as he stood up, grabbing his gun, ready for whatever was coming. The alarm was never a good sign, especially on a remote outpost like this one. It meant something was out of place. Something was here. He ran to the control room, his boots pounding on the metal floor, his mind racing. As soon as he entered, his eyes fell on the radar screen. Small, unidentified ship had just crashed into the nearby terrain. The distress beacon was flashing, but it was weak. The ship had been damaged, and whoever was inside needed help fast. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed his helmet, ran to the hangar, and climbed into his small shuttle. The cold air blasted his face as he took off toward the crash site. The planet's surface was rough, with jagged mountains and deep valleys, but Jake was a trained pilot. He knew how to navigate it, even in a storm. As he approached the crash site, he saw the wreckage. It was a sleek, alien ship, shiny, with curves and patterns that didn't belong to anything he had ever seen. Smoke was rising from the twisted metal, and the air smelled like burning fuel. Jake's heart raced even faster. This was no ordinary crash. He had no idea what kind of ship it was, but he knew it wasn't human. He landed a safe distance away from the wreckage and made his way to the wrecked ship on foot. He kept his gun ready, unsure of what to expect. As he neared the wreck, a figure slowly emerged from the smoke. At first, Jake thought it was a mirage trick of the heat and smoke. But no, there was someone there. A woman. She was tall, with dark skin and long flowing hair. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and her skin shimmered as though it were made of something soft, almost liquid. She was wearing strange armor, though it was damaged, with deep scratches and burns across it. The woman staggered as she stepped forward, her breath shallow. She looked disoriented, as if the crash had taken everything from her. Jake approached slowly, his hand raised in peace. He didn't want to startle her, especially not with the way she was looking around. Clearly in shock, "Hey," Jake called out gently. "Are you okay?" The woman's eyes met his, and for a moment she said nothing. Her gaze seemed to assess him as though she were trying to figure out whether or not she could trust him. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Need help," she said, her words slow as if it hurt to speak. "I've lost everything. My ship. My people. I don't know where I am." Jake's heart softened. She was obviously an alien, but she didn't seem dangerous. In fact, she looked vulnerable. She needed help, just like the distress beacon had indicated. "Don't worry. You're safe now," Jake said, moving closer. "I'll get you some help." The woman shook her head, her expression serious. "No, I don't want help like that," she said firmly. "I can't go back to my people, not like this." Jake frowned, confused. "What do you mean? I can call for a rescue. There are ships that can help you." The woman shook her head again, this time more forcefully. "You don't understand. Right. If I go back, they'll—" Her voice trailed off, and she turned away as if she couldn't even bear to finish the thought. "I can't risk it." Jake had seen desperation before, but this was different. He didn't understand the whole story, but he knew one thing: this woman needed help, and he couldn't turn his back on her. "Okay?" Jake said, lowering his gun, though his guard was still up. "You don't have to go back if you don't want to. You can stay here for now. I can keep you safe." The woman turned back to him, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and disbelief. "You would help me? After everything?" Jake nodded. "Of course, it's what I do. I'm not going to leave you here alone." For a moment, the woman said nothing. Then, as if she had made a decision, she stepped forward, her posture straightening. She extended her hand toward him, and Jake took it. Without hesitation, "I'm Princess Lyra of the Scifi Empire," she said, her voice steady now, though there was still a faint tremor in it. "And I offer myself to you in exchange for shelter. I will do whatever it takes to stay alive." Jake blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean, I offer myself to you?" Princess Lyra repeated. "I know what humans value. I can offer whatever you need in exchange for your help. My people, they will come for me, but I cannot go back. I will do whatever you ask." Jake stood there, stunned. He had never heard an alien speak like this before. It was a bold offer, but it sounded like something born from desperation. He wasn't sure what she expected from him, but he wasn't about to take advantage of her vulnerability. "No need for that," Jake said, his voice softer now. "I'm not going to take anything from you. I just want to help." Princess Lyra didn't speak for a moment, but her eyes softened, and she seemed to relax slightly. The air around them was tense, but there was something else there to Anne understanding, a silent agreement. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't know what this means to me." "God," Jake nodded, feeling a sense of duty settle in his chest. This wasn't just about protecting an alien, it was about doing what was right, no matter who the person was or where they came from. He would help Princess Lyra no matter the cost. He gestured toward the shuttle. "Let's get you somewhere safe first, and we'll figure this out." As the two of them walked back to the shuttle, Jake couldn't help but wonder what this encounter would mean for the future. He had just promised to protect an alien royal, and in return, she had offered him something that still left him speechless. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: this would be a journey neither of them would ever forget. The days after Princess Lyra's arrival at Jake's outpost were filled with a mix of uncertainty and curiosity. Jake had never imagined he'd find himself helping an alien royal, let alone one so far from her own people. But there was something about Lyra's quiet strength that made him want to protect her, no matter the cost. At first, the two barely spoke, with the language barrier making things a bit difficult. Jake had only learned a few basic phrases in the alien languages during his training, but Lyra's words were slow, careful, and often filled with a kind of sadness he hadn't expected. She wasn't just a stranger from a faraway world, she was someone who had lost everything, someone in pain. Lyra spent the first few days recovering in a small room Jake had set up for her. It was modest, with the bare essentials: a bed, a desk, a small window, and a few supplies. Jake had made sure the room was comfortable enough, though it wasn't much. He had learned that she wasn't used to such a simple life. As royalty, Lyra had always been surrounded by luxury, by the comforts of palace life. But that world was gone now. Jake would check on her regularly, making sure she had enough food and water. They spoke little, but each time they did, Lyra seemed to relax more, her body language becoming less tense, more open. One afternoon, Jake found Lyra sitting near the window, staring out at the rugged landscape that stretched before them. Expression was unreadable, but there was a hint of longing in her eyes. "Still thinking about your home?" Jake asked, walking into the room with a tray of food in his hands. Lyra turned her head toward him, her gaze softening as she noticed the food. She had already eaten, but it was the thought that mattered. "Sometimes, I wonder if my people even know I'm alive," she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. "I was supposed to lead them. But now, ... But Jake set the tray down on the table, his brow furrowing. "You've been through a lot," he said, sitting down across from her. "I can't imagine what you're feeling right now, but you're here and you're safe. That's all that matters." Lyra nodded slowly, but her eyes still carried the weight of loss. She hadn't opened up much to him yet, but Jake knew. She was beginning to trust him. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. For the first time since she had arrived, he saw her not just as a royal or an alien, but as a person who had lost everything and was simply trying to survive. "Me about your people," Jake said after a moment, wanting to learn more about the woman who had come into his life so suddenly. "What was the Scifi Empire like?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, then sighed, looking out the window again. The Scifi Empire was Beautiful, she began, her voice distant as though recalling memories that were now fading. It was a place of peace and prosperity. My people were scholars, philosophers, and warriors. We lived in harmony with nature, with the stars. I was trained to lead them, to guide them through the future. But now, everything is in ruins. The war took it all. Jake listened quietly, his mind racing as he imagined a world so different from his own. A world of peace, of wisdom, and of a people who had once thrived. It was hard to picture it now, especially after hearing about the destruction that had come to her empire. Do you think there's any chance to rebuild? Jake asked gently. Lyra's expression darkened. I don't know. I was the last of my family. Without me, there's no one left to lead the Sintraki. My people will scatter, lost without direction, and I don't know if they would accept me back, even if I could find them. I've failed them.
Oh.
Jake's heart went out to her. He couldn't understand the full weight of what she had lost, but he could see the pain in her eyes. She was not just a royal figure to him anymore. She was someone who had been through unspeakable loss, just like so many others in the galaxy. She was just a person. You didn't fail them, Jake said firmly. No one could have predicted. What happened? You've survived and you're still standing. That's something. Lyra looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to find the truth in his words. For a moment, there was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding that lingered in the air. Two souls connected by the weight of their separate burdens as the days passed. Jake began to notice something else. Lyra was changing. She was no longer the distant royal alien who had arrived with a desperate plea for help. She was starting to become more relaxed around him, more at ease with the life she now had to live. Her posture softened, and there was a warmth in her smile that Jake hadn't seen before. They spent more time together, talking about their worlds, their lives, their hopes for the future. Jake learned that Lyra had always dreamed of exploring the galaxy, seeing the stars with her own eyes, rather than simply reading about them in books. She had never known what it was like to live among the common people, to see the struggles and triumphs of everyday life. It was a perspective she had never considered until now. In turn, Jake shared stories of Earth and his experiences growing. Up on a military base, he spoke of his family, his friends, and the feeling of never truly belonging anywhere until he found his place in the military. Lyra listened intently, fascinated by the stories of a world she had never known. They both found solace in these conversations, each learning about the other's life in ways that felt personal and meaningful. One evening, as they sat together on the roof of the outpost, watching the stars twinkle in the vast sky, Lyra spoke. Again, her voice soft and contemplative. You know, Jake, she said, I never imagined I would find something like this, a place like this, with someone like you. When I left my people, I thought I would die alone. I thought I would never find peace again, but maybe this is what I was meant to find. Turned to look at her, the glow of the stars reflecting in her eyes. I didn't expect this either, he admitted, a small smile tugging at his lips. But I'm glad you're here. I'll do everything I can to make sure you're safe. You don't have to be alone anymore. For the first time in a long while, Lyra smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached her eyes and softened her features. In that moment, Jake realized something. This was more than just shelter for her. This was the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. Their bond had grown from mere survival to something deeper, something real. As the stars twinkled above them, Jake and Lyra sat in silence, not needing words to understand the unspoken promise they had made to each other. The days had grown quieter, and with the calm came a sense of unease. Jake's outpost was more than just a safe haven for Princess Lyra. It had become a place where both of them found refuge from the chaos of their lives. Yet as much as they tried to enjoy the simple peace they had built together, Jake knew that the danger wasn't over. Princess Lyra was still hunted, and that truth weighed heavily on him. One evening, while they were sitting in the mess hall, a sudden beep broke. The quiet. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at the console on the wall. Distress signal had just been received, one that wasn't supposed to be there. Jake stood up quickly, a frown crossing his face. He rushed to the communication panel, where the signal was blinking in a red alert pattern. Lyra followed behind him, concern in her eyes. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake didn't answer right away. He was already analyzing the incoming signal, his eyes narrowing. The coordinates attached to the signal weren't random. They were coming from a Shiphan enemy ship, one that had tracked Lyra's movements since the crash. "We need to move," Jake said, his voice firm. He didn't want to panic her, but his gut was telling him the worst. Whoever was behind this had tracked her, and they were close. Too close. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "They found us, didn't they?" Jake nodded, his jaw tightening. "It looks that way. We don't have much time." Lyra's face paled, her hands shaking slightly. She had tried to keep her composure, but the realization hit her hard. Had been running from her past for so long, and now it was catching up to her. The Scifi Empire's enemies were relentless, and no matter where she went, they would always find her. Jake took a deep breath and turned to her, trying to calm her fears. "You need to stay hidden. I'll handle it." But Lyra shook her head. "I can't hide anymore. You've already taken everything from me. I won't hide like a coward." Jake stepped closer to her, his hand on her shoulder. "You're not a coward. You've lost more than anyone should have to. Have to think this through. We can't face them recklessly." For a long moment, Lyra didn't say anything. Then, slowly, she nodded. "You're right. I trust you." Jake offered her a small, reassuring smile. He was grateful for her trust, but he couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. This wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about keeping them both alive. Jake quickly made his way to the communications room. He contacted the nearest military outpost for backup, but deep down, he knew it might take too long. The enemy was already closing in. They had to leave. "Now, Lyra?" Jake said as he returned to the small room where she had been waiting. "We're getting out of here. There's a safe zone about 5 clicks from here. It's an old military outpost. We can make it there." Lyra's eyes locked on his. She could see the determination in his face, but there was something else there, too, a quiet fear. "Will we make it there before they catch up?" she asked softly. Jake didn't want to lie to her, but he also didn't want to give her false hope. He knew the chances were slim, but he wasn't going to let her give up. "We'll make it," he said, more confidently than he felt. With little more than a quick grab of supplies, Jake and Lyra left the outpost under the cover of darkness. The cold night air hit them like a wall as they made their way to the shuttle. Jake had already started the engines, and the small craft hummed to life. Lyra climbed into the co-pilot seat beside him, her hands tightly gripping the sides of her seat. Her mind was racing, and her heart thudded in her chest. This wasn't just an escape. This was a fight for survival. As the shuttle lifted off, Jake piloted it away from the outpost, weaving through the rough terrain to avoid detection. The stars above were cold and indifferent, shining down on them as they raced against time. The radio crackled. "This is a warning to the fugitive Princess Lyra of the Scifi Empire. You are to surrender immediately. Failure to comply will result in your destruction." Jake's grip on the controls tightened. He didn't respond to the transmission. There was no point. They knew who they were, and they knew what would happen if they didn't act fast. "Hold on," Jake muttered under his breath as he pushed the throttle forward, steering the shuttle through the jagged mountains that surrounded the area. The enemy ship was closing in, its presence unmistakable. Lyra looked over at him, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "We have to do something. We can't just run forever." Jake glanced at her. "We won't be running forever. Just keep calm." The enemy ship's shadow loomed behind them, its engines roaring as it closed the distance. Jake knew they had only a few minutes before the pursuit would become deadly. His only hope was to get to the safe zone in time. Lyra's hand suddenly reached for the comm system, her fingers moving quickly. "Jake, I have an idea," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "I can hack into their communication system. If I can create a false signal, I can buy us some time." Jake's eyes widened in surprise. "You can do that?" Lyra nodded. "I was trained for this. It's risky, but it might work. Just trust me." Didn't hesitate. "Do it." Lyra quickly set to work, her hands moving swiftly across the controls. She worked faster than Jake had ever seen, her mind focused entirely on the task. She was a royal, but she had been trained for more than just leadership. She had been taught to think strategically, to protect her people even if it meant sacrificing her own. The shuttle shook as the enemy ship fired a warning shot, a blast that narrowly missed them. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he pushed the shuttle to its limits. Trying to escape the barrage, Lyra's voice cut through the tension. "I've done it. I've created a false signal. I think we've turned back toward the outpost." Jake glanced at her, barely able to believe it. "That's incredible. Now let's get out of here." It's the false signal in place. The enemy ship hesitated, its crew temporarily fooled by the ruse. But it was only a matter of time before they realized the trick. Jake wasn't taking any chances. He pushed the shuttle faster, aiming for the safe zone that was now within reach. As the mountains began to fade into the distance, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. They'd bought themselves some time, but the danger was far from over. The enemy would keep coming, but Jake and Lyra weren't going to run anymore. Together, they would face whatever came next. The shuttle raced through the vast expanse of space, the stars blinking by in a blur as Jake piloted with all the skill he had. The mountains were far behind now, and the safe zone was close, just a few more clicks away. Jake had always trusted his instincts, and they told him they could make it. But even with the false signal keeping the enemy at bay, something nagged at the back of his mind. The Sintraki's enemies were relentless. They weren't going to stop until they had Lyra. Beside him, Lyra sat silently, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her seat. Her gaze was fixed on the viewport, watching the endless stars as if searching for something beyond them, maybe even a way out of this nightmare. Jake could feel the tension in the air, both of them knowing that they were not safe yet, but they hadn't escaped danger for good. After a few minutes, the silence was broken by a faint beeping sound. Jake glanced down at the console, his heart dropping. A new message. The signal came through on the encrypted frequency they had been using to communicate with the safe zone. But it wasn't a routine check, it was a warning. Jake's eyes widened in shock as he read the message on the screen. His mind raced, but for a moment, he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. "Jake, what's wrong?" Lyra asked. Her voice sharp with concern. She had seen the look on his face, the confusion, the sudden change in his demeanor. Jake swallowed hard and spoke through clenched teeth. "It's from the outpost we just left." They single quotes. "They've been compromised." Lyra's eyes widened. Compromised. What does that mean? Jake didn't want to answer her directly. He didn't want to tell her that someone they had trusted had betrayed them. The message on the screen was clear. Someone at the outpost had sold them out. The enemy knew exactly where they were headed, and they were now preparing to intercept. "Then before they reached the safe zone, they know where we're going," Jake said, his voice heavy with the weight of the truth. "We've been set up." Lyra felt a chill run through her. Betrayal. It was something she had never experienced before, not in her royal life, certainly not from people who were supposed to be her allies. She had always lived surrounded by honor, diplomacy, and trust. But in the galaxy, that had never mattered much. And now, in this moment, she felt the crushing reality that even in a place where she had hoped to be safe, there was no escape from the dangers lurking in the dark. "Who could have done this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Jake didn't have an answer. He didn't want to believe that the people they had worked with could betray them so icily. But the signs were all there. The outpost had been too quick to give them shelter, too eager to help them in the beginning. There had been too many loose ends, too many questions left unanswered. "There's no time to figure that out," Jake said, his voice firm. "We need to make it to the safe zone before they catch up with us." But just as he spoke, the shuttle shook violently, throwing both of them forward in their seats. The sudden jolt sent a surge of panic through Jake's chest as he quickly gripped the controls. He checked the systems. Everything seemed fine, but the shaking continued, stronger now, as though something was trying to push them off course. Lyra gasped, clutching the side of her seat. "What's happening?" Jake's eyes darted to the radar, his heart sinking. "We've been hit," he said. "They're here." The enemy's already on us. A low growl of engine power filled the shuttle as Jake fought with the controls, trying to stabilize the ship. But it was too late. The enemy ship had caught up to them. They weren't letting go. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as she looked out the window, seeing the massive silhouette of the enemy ship in the distance, closing in fast. She could make out the distinct shape of its dark hull, the sharp edges designed to intimidate. The ship wasn't here to negotiate. It was here to end this chase once and for all. The enemy fired again, and Jake had to swerve to avoid another blast, narrowly dodging the shot. The force of the maneuver caused the shuttle to dip sharply, and they both felt the weight of the fall.
Ow.
For a brief moment, the shuttle was airborne, suspended in the void before gravity pulled it back. Lyra's hand shot out, instinctively grabbing Jake's arm. "Need to fight back," she said, her voice urgent. "There has to be something we can do." Jake's grip tightened on the controls, but he knew they were outmatched. The enemy ship was larger, more powerful, and far more advanced. No matter how much Jake wanted to fight back, they simply didn't have the firepower to stand a chance. "We can't fight them head-on," Jake said, shaking his head. "We're going to have to outrun them." The shuttle dipped again as Jake punched the throttle forward, desperately trying to gain speed. They needed to break free to get to that safe zone where they could regroup. But the enemy ship was relentless, following them closely, firing on their tail. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Lyra whispered, her voice cracking. Jake didn't answer right away. He focused on flying, on keeping them alive long enough to get to safety. But the cold truth hung in the air between them. They were running out of time, and then, just as they thought they might have a chance, the radio crackled to life. "Princess Lyra," came a familiar voice, one that sent a cold shiver down both their spines. "You really thought you could escape? You're not going anywhere?" Jake recognized one he hadn't expected to hear again. It was the voice of someone he had trusted, someone who had worked with them at the outpost. "Traitor," Jake muttered under his breath. "It was you." Lyra's eyes widened in horror as she realized who it was, the person she had once trusted. Someone who had promised to help them was the one responsible for leading the enemy to them. She had been betrayed by someone who had once sworn loyalty to her. The cold realization settled in her chest like a weight she couldn't escape. She had been running from her enemies for so long, but she hadn't considered that betrayal could come from within her own ranks. Jake's voice was steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "We're not giving up, Lyra. I'll make sure you're safe." But even as he spoke, the enemy ship loomed closer, and the possibility of escape was slipping further and further away. The shuttle's engines roared as Jake pushed the controls to their limits. The enemy ship, looming behind them, was closing in fast. Every time they tried to break free, the enemy fired another blast, forcing Jake to veer off course. His hands were shaking with the effort, but his focus never wavered. He couldn't afford to let up, not now. Lyra was depending on him. Beside him, Lyra sat silently, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the view screen. The stars outside were a blur as they sped through the darkness, but she couldn't focus on the stars. Her mind was elsewhere. The realization of betrayal still weighed heavily on her heart. The person she had trusted was the one who had led the enemy right to them. The shock of it made her feel cold inside, as if the world had suddenly become much smaller. It's much more dangerous. "I never thought it would come to this," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper, almost lost in the hum of the shuttle. "I thought I could trust them, but they've already given up on me." Jake's grip on the controls tightened. He didn't respond right away, his thoughts racing. He knew the pain Lyra was feeling. He knew what it was like to feel abandoned. But now, they didn't have time to dwell on betrayal. The enemy was too close, and they had to find a way to escape. "We're not done yet," Jake finally said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. "We'll get through this, Lyra. We just need to keep moving." Turned her gaze to him, her eyes softening. She could see the determination in his face, the quiet strength that he had shown since the moment they first met. She had trusted him with her life, and now, more than ever, she realized how much that trust meant to her. In a galaxy full of danger and uncertainty, Jake was the one constant she could rely on. The enemy ship fired again, this time striking the shuttle's rear shields. The shuttle shook violently, throwing both of them forward. Jake cursed under his breath, quickly stabilizing the ship. "Can't keep taking hits like this," he muttered. "We have to get to that safe zone now." Lyra glanced out the viewport, seeing the massive enemy ship gaining on them. There was no way they could outrun it with their shuttle's damaged engines. But maybe there was another way. "Jake," Lyra said, her voice firm this time. "Can't keep running. It's time we fight back." Jake looked at her, surprised by the sudden shift in her tone. "Fight back? We don't have the firepower to go up against them." "We don't need firepower," Lyra replied, her eyes brightening with determination. "I've been trained in tactics, in strategy. May not have an army at my command, but I know how to outsmart them." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had seen Lyra's strength before, but this was different. There was a quiet intensity in her now, a fire that hadn't been there before. She wasn't the frightened princess who had first arrived on his outpost. She was someone else, someone who wasn't going to let herself be a victim anymore. "What do you have in mind?" Jake asked, his voice steady, but his mind racing with possibilities. Lyra took a deep breath. "There's an old emergency protocol built into the shuttle's systems. It's a last resort maneuver that can scramble our signal and confuse their tracking systems. It'll give us a few minutes of confusion. We can use that time to get to the safe zone." Jake didn't hesitate. "Do it." Lyra quickly moved to the console, her fingers flying over the buttons with precision. She had been trained for moments like this, and now she was putting that training to use. As the shuttle shook again from another blast, Lyra activated the system. The console beeped, and a bright light flashed in front of them. "What's happening?" Jake asked, his eyes darting to the screen. "The signal is scrambled," Lyra said, her voice filled with confidence. "We should be invisible to them." For a short time, Jake immediately punched the throttle forward, pushing the shuttle into overdrive. The enemy ship, momentarily confused by the scrambled signal, slowed its pursuit. Jake's heart raced as he pushed the shuttle harder, aiming for the safe zone in the distance. The old military outpost was close now, just a few more minutes, and they would be there. But even with the signal scrambled, Jake knew it wouldn't be long before the enemy ship recalibrated and found them again. "Lyra," Jake said, his voice tense, "how long can we keep this up? We're almost at the safe zone, but I don't know if we'll make it before they get their tracking back online." Lyra's fingers flew across the console again, activating a set of protocols. "I've set up a secondary backup system that will generate false signals, sending them in the wrong direction." Jake's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can do that?" "I can," Lyra replied, a small, confident smile on her face. "Risky, but it should buy us enough time to get to safety." Jake didn't waste another second. He focused on flying, his eyes scanning the dark space ahead of them. The shuttle hummed, its engines pushing harder than they ever had before. He was pushing it to its limits. But the thought of Lyra, of the promise he had made to keep her safe, drove him forward. The enemy ship was still behind them, but it seemed to be losing their trail. The false signals were working just as Lyra had promised. For a brief moment it looked like they might actually make it. Then, without warning, the enemy ship fired again, this time hitting the shuttle's engines directly. The shuttle lurched forward, the impact throwing them both against their seats. Sparks flew from the console and the ship's systems flickered. "Damn it," Jake shouted, struggling to keep the shuttle steady. "We're losing power." Lyra's calm voice cut through the chaos. "Jake, we can't give up now. The safe zone is just ahead." With every ounce of strength left in him, Jake pushed the shuttle forward. The enemy was closing in again, but he refused to let them win. He could see the outlines of the old military outpost in the distance now, its lights blinking in the void of space. They were almost there. One final blast from the enemy ship rocked the shuttle, but Jake didn't slow down. He flew the shuttle directly toward the outpost, its shields flaring as they entered the atmosphere. The enemy ship fired one more time, but it was too late. The shuttle burst through the outer defenses of the safe zone and into the protective barrier of the outpost. Jake slammed the controls down, and the shuttle skidded to a halt on the landing pad. He took a deep breath, his body shaking with exhaustion. But they were safe for now. Lyra turned to him, her eyes wide with gratitude. We made it. Jake looked at her, a tired but relieved smile on his face. We made it. But as they sat there, surrounded by the safety of the outpost, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The war for Lyra's survival wasn't over, but as long as they had each other, he knew they could face whatever came next. The safe zone was a welcome sight. Jake and Lyra had barely made it, their shuttle shuddering as it touched down on the landing pad. The military outpost was quiet, a small but fortified base hidden on a barren moon far from the conflicts that had consumed the galaxy. It wasn't much, but it was safe for now. The landing was rough, and Jake's hands still gripped the controls, his body tense. He could feel the exhaustion setting in, but it wasn't over yet. There was still the matter of the enemy ship, the betrayal, and the growing uncertainty about what to do next. Lyra looked over at him, her face pale but determined. They had made it here, but would this place really offer them the safety they needed? The shuttle's engines powered down with a low hum, and Jake exhaled slowly. He turned to Lyra, who was already unbuckling her seatbelt. There was something about the way she moved, the quiet confidence that had replaced the fear she had carried when they first met. Lyra wasn't just the princess anymore. She was someone who had survived, and that strength showed in every gesture. She made Jake, Lyra said, her voice steady as she turned to him. We're here. What happens now? Jake paused for a moment, his mind running through their options. He knew they couldn't stay here forever. The enemy would find them sooner or later, and the outpost's defenses weren't built to withstand an alt assault. They needed to keep moving, but to where? I don't know yet, Jake admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. We need to regroup, figure out what we're up against. The enemy might have lost us for now, but that won't last. Come for us again. Lyra nodded, her eyes narrowing with focus. I won't run anymore, Jake. I can't keep doing that. I need to face this. Jake looked at her, surprised by the firmness in her voice. He had never heard her speak like this before, not with such clear purpose. She wasn't just accepting her fate anymore. She was making a decision. What do you mean? Jake asked, though he had a feeling he already knew the answer. I mean that I can't live in hiding anymore, she said, standing up and walking to the small viewport of the shuttle. The Centraki Empire is gone. My people are scattered, and I don't know if I can ever lead them again. But I can't stay here, hiding from the truth. If we want to stop them, we need to act. We need to find a way to take back what's ours. Jake felt a knot tighten in his chest. He'd always respected Lyra's strength, but this was different. She was no longer the frightened princess, asking for shelter. She was a leader in her own right, someone who had come to terms with the devastation of her world and was ready to face the future head-on. He stood up, moving closer to her. You're right, but we can't do it alone. We need allies. We need a plan. Lyra turned to him, her expression serious. I know. Can't do this by myself anymore. I need your help, Jake, and I need to know that you'll stand with me. Jake felt the weight of her words settle deep inside him. This wasn't just about keeping her safe anymore. This was about something much bigger. Lyra wasn't asking him to protect Hirsch. He was asking him to be a part of something that could change the course of her future and the future of her people. I'm with you, Jake said, without hesitation. Whatever happens, we do this together. For the first time in a long while, Lyra smiled. It was a quiet, knowing smile, but it spoke volumes. She had found someone who wasn't just going to help her survive. He was going to help her fight. Two of them spent the next few hours inside the safe zone, gathering information, analyzing their next moves. Jake accessed the outpost's computer systems, downloading maps and strategic plans for the surrounding regions. He knew the enemy wasn't far behind, and the outpost's defenses were enough to hold them off for a little while, but not forever. They had to be prepared for the inevitable fight. Lyra sat by his side, offering suggestions, her mind sharp as she helped him analyze the data. She had always been trained to lead, but now, more than ever, she realized that leadership meant more than just giving orders. It meant making decisions. Even when the future was uncertain, we need to contact any remaining allies. Lyra said, her voice low as she scanned through a list of contacts. I have connections with a few of my old military commanders. They'll be loyal. We can rebuild, Jake. We can fight back. Jake nodded, impressed by her resolve. I'll get in touch with them. We need to move quickly. The longer we stay here, the more we're exposed. Just then, an alarm went off. The base's security system beeped loudly, signaling an incoming threat. Jake stood up, instantly alert. They've found us, he said, his voice grim. Lyra didn't flinch. She had prepared for this moment, knowing the danger wasn't over. Then it's time to move. We need to leave this place before they come. The two of them grabbed their gear and rushed to the exit. The base's emergency protocols kicked in, locking down all the entry points and activating the escape routes. Jake and Lyra made their way through the narrow hallways, heading for the secondary shuttle that would take them to a safer location. As they moved, Jake couldn't help but think about how quickly things had changed. They had gone from a simple survival mission to something much bigger, something that could change the fate of an entire empire. As they reached the shuttle, Jake paused for a moment, glancing back at the base. This place had been a sanctuary, a temporary refuge. But now, it was just another obstacle in their path. We'll be okay, won't we? Lyra asked, her voice quiet, but full of determination. Jake looked at her, his expression serious but full. Of resolve, we will, as long as we stay together. With that, they boarded the shuttle and took off, heading into the unknown. There was no turning back now. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they had made their decision. Together, they would face whatever came next.